Did you know that today is World Mangrove Day? Well, guess what? We're celebrating a little bit and we're putting it inside the spotlight on now.
Now, World Mangrove Day is a significant occasion celebrated on July 26 each year to raise awareness about the vital role mangrove forests play in our ecosystem and to promote their conservation. Now, mangroves are unique and resilient coastal ecosystems found in tropical and subtropical regions worldwide. And this morning, the acting director of the Institute of Marine Affairs and a wetland ecologist, Rahana Juman, joins us to raise awareness about the importance of mangroves. Rihanna, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
So let's start off with what exactly are mangroves and where can we find them in TNT?
So mangrove actually is a number of tree species and shrubs. They're collectively referred to as mangrove because of where they exist. They're trees that are adapted to the intertidal area, so they're able to live in salt water as well as be flooded. So they have special adaptations that allow them to live and dominate that part of the environment, the coastal zone between the intertidal.
Yeah. Now, when I think mangroves, I think Caroni Swamp.
Yes.
But where else can we see them?
We have mangroves all along our west coast. We could start as high up as Quesa River in Chagaramas, coming all the way down to Mukarapo, opposite the stadium. As a matter of fact, we have cleared about 50% of our mangrove for construction along our coast. We have mangroves in Port of Spain, Sea Lots. Port of Spain, again, was an area that we reclaimed mangrove to expand the city. Then we have mangroves as well all along our, going further south from after Caroni, Point Lisas, Guadino Swamp, which is in San Fernando, Icacas, Rosilac. And then we have as well on our south coast, Moruga, Guayari, East Coast, we have Nariva Swamp. So it's along our coastline. We have fewer mangrove areas on our north coast. We just have a small system in Mukarapo. And then in Tobago, most of our large mangrove forests are found on the southwest part of the island, from Bonaccord Lagoon to in Buku Reef, near Buku Reef, Quilgan Swamp, which is by the airport, and then Pichichu Lagoon, where you have the Mandalena Hotel. So those are where most of our larger mangrove systems exist. But we have them throughout our coastlines.
Interesting. Now, I've heard you mention a few times that we've had to clear away the mangrove soil expansion.
Yes.
And so tell us about the benefits of having them in the first place and maybe some of the challenges or the disadvantages of clearing them away.
Okay, so I think we know now more than we knew back then. And back then, we were dealing with things like malaria and so on, and people saw mangroves as areas that fester mosquitoes. So we had to fill them in. And also, too, people dump their garbage and so forth. But we have learned a lot since then, and the perception has changed. Unfortunately, because of where they're located in the intertidal, which is considered prime coastal real estate, a lot of it has been reclaimed from Port of Spain to Westmoreland, Bayshore, Mukarapo, all the way down to Point Lisas. We would have reclaimed mangroves to actually build our Point Lisas industrial estate and so forth. But the thing about it is the mangroves now, and what we have to protect because they are our protection against the impacts of climate change, things like storm surge, coastal erosion, as well as wind, damage from wind, because they provide that windbreak. In addition to that, they provide ecosystems for a number of different species, from fish to invertebrates, things like the crab, the oyster that you find them in the mangrove swamp. And there are people who are dependent on these mangroves for their livelihoods. And as you know, Caroni Swamp is our largest mangrove forest in Trinidad, and it's popular. It's an ecotourism area, and a lot of people make money by taking people in to see the scarlet ibis and so forth. It supports over 200 species of birds that come in there. Now we have the flamingo, who has come as a visitor and is now resident. They're living now in Trinidad.
Yes.
So it provides that home. And what we're learning more and more now is that in addition to being important for what we call climate adaptation, helping with flooding and coastal erosion and so forth, mangroves are also important with regards to climate mitigation or taking in actually what you call sequestering or absorbing carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas that has been responsible for a lot of the climate change impacts. They actually sequester and they store it in the biomass of the tree as well as the sediments. So you have a lot of mangroves stored a lot of carbon stored in the sediments. But if you go and you clear that mangrove, you release that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So we're doing now a lot of research trying to estimate how much is actually quantified. Because if we know how much is quantified, we can actually start to monetize that.
Well, Ms. Schumann, let's look at today being World Mangrove Day. Of course, the importance of it being to raise awareness. How can we raise awareness? But first of all, tell us the theme for this year and then how we can raise awareness about protecting our mangroves.
So the theme is celebrating resilience, raising awareness, and embracing conservation efforts. Around the world, there's a lot of effort to conserve mangroves because we have recognized how important they are to our existence, right? Even back in 2004, areas that had mangroves were less impacted by the tsunami, the Asian tsunami, So we recognize that, and there's a lot of effort to conserve mangroves and even to restore and rehabilitate. And it's very expensive, and the success of rehabilitating or restoring a mangrove forest is very low. So it's better for us to actually try to conserve or preserve what we have today. Try to and take whatever effort, right, that is required to preserve it rather than trying to destroying it and then trying to bring it back.
Yes, yeah. So then what is the IMA doing to sort of help us to conserve what we already have? Are there, for example, research initiatives right now at the institution where people can get involved in, or even that the institution is doing?
Sure. So the IMA, this year we're celebrating our 45th anniversary, of course, and we are a research institution. So we have been researching mangrove forests and doing a lot of monitoring and so forth, and we have published one of the most recent publications would have been Mangrove Forests of Trinidad and Tobago, which we did back in 2001. And again, it's to raise awareness. We've been mapping and looking how the mangrove forest has changed over time, using satellite imagery to do things like change detection analysis. As I mentioned before, we've been doing work in trying to quantify mangrove biomass and carbon storage, both in the biomass of the tree, the trunk and the leaves, as well as in the soil. We do constant monitoring in terms of water quality and so on. A couple of years ago, we did a study where we looked at the Caroni swamp, and the Caroni swamp in particular, because it basically captures a lot of the water coming off of the northern range and a lot of the agricultural areas before it hits the Gulf of Paria. And our research has shown that the Caroni swamp actually helps absorb some of that nutrient, some of that pollution before it actually goes out into the Gulf of Paria. So and then of course the biggest part about the institute is not only doing the research but providing policy guidelines. So we're very much involved in advising on policies, what we need to do, how we need to conserve and so forth. And what has been recognized worldwide is for you to have successful mangrove conservation or even successful mangrove rehabilitation, you need to get people involved. People are crucial part of the process. And to sustain any effort, you need community engagement. You need people to be aware, to know how this mangroves impact my life, how do I benefit from it, and therefore how can I help conserve it?
Well, then how can I help conserve it? So, for example, I know that the Institute has a team and they're working on conservation, but as an average citizen, me, my viewer, how can we help, conserve what we already have?
Well, first of all, I think we have to understand what is driving mangroves, the loss of mangroves, and how we can remove those impacts. Pollution, one of the things that you would be very surprised about when you go into a wetland area, especially when there's a river coming in, is the amount of solid waste being deposited. Plastics, as you know, it's terrible for the environment. Know where you put your waste, know where your wastewater is going, ensure that it's properly sewered and so forth and not flowing into the mangroves. Also, too, when you go into the mangrove, make sure and take out what you go in with. Remove your waste if you're going for recreational purposes and so forth. As a fisher, you have to look at sustainable fishing practices, right? So that you can ensure there's going to be fish for tomorrow. These are some of the things. And then you can get engaged. There are a lot of voluntary efforts to rehabilitate, to clean mangrove forests and so forth. And we, IMA, engage with a number of private institutions or private businesses, private sector businesses, to do rehabilitation work. So we have one in Tobago called the Marine Resilience Initiative, where we'll be working on restoring seagrasses and coral reef along with preserving our mangrove forests, because we have the three existing together.
Yeah.
In Trinidad here, we are going to be starting an initiative with a company, a gas company, again to help rehabilitate a mangrove area. So we would be asking folks to get involved, get engaged, help us, and learn. The Institute has a library.
Yes.
We have a wealth of information.
Yes.
Feel free to visit, feel free to ask us questions, and to become actively involved, because that's the only way we are going to be able to really conserve our forests.
Ms. Juman, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We're almost out of time, but I have two quick questions. First of all, how do we rehabilitate mangroves? Because you keep mentioning that a lot. Is it something we plant? I mean, how do we get that back? That's one. Quickly, 30 seconds. And then the second part is, do you see any sort of, or is there any scientific data to show that mangroves can help protect flooding?
Yes. Yes, there is. Because of the kind of environment, they act as a sponge. They absorb a lot of flood water. They hold a lot of flood water, number one. And number two, if you want to rehabilitate a mangrove forest, you have to first understand what led to the mangrove forest loss, and you need to remove that impact. So if it's hydrological changes, if it's pollution, we need to address that. The system is quite resilient. It will rehabilitate once you create all the right conditions. However, we like to plant. Right? I mean, it raises awareness.
Yes.
It is the last thing we should be doing.
Yes.
But the first thing is know why it died and how we could remove the stressors.
Yeah. We're going to pause on it for that now. Thank you so much,
You're
Ms.
welcome.
Juman.
Thank you.
I know this is not your first time. It's not going to be your last as well. But let me also congratulate you and the team for celebrating 45 years. What a milestone. So congratulations on that. And thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
And that, of course, was Dr. Rahana Juman, the Acting Director of the Institute of Marine Affairs and also a wetland ecologist, joining us on this World Mangrove Day. You're on the Now Morning Show. Stay with us, because up next we're going to be talking about Code 727, and you don't want to miss that conversation. Stay with us.